Amboseli Reserve, mid-morning. The southern fence line rarely sees movement beyond birds or antelope, but today the grass bends under heavier weight. An elephant cow limps from the scrub, her left shoulder drooped, flank streaked with dried soil. She does not trumpet or pause to graze. Behind her, a calf follows, smaller than most, ribs showing through pale skin, one leg dragging slightly through the dust. It is not a march, it is not a return. It is something quieter, something more deliberate. She stops just short of the open gap in the boundary line, the one left during water pipe repairs 2 weeks earlier. Her ears fan out once, slow and uncertain, but she doesn't enter. The calf pushes against her side, then slips forward, landing softly on his front knees. He doesn't rise. He doesn't cry. Inside the observation tower, Elias lowers his binoculars. For a moment, he doesn't move. Then he radios once, calm. South edge, elephant cow, thin calf, possible distress. The reply is faint. He doesn't wait. With his water pouch slung and a linen wrap under arm, he walks down past the acacia posts and into the open scrub. The cow watches. Her head doesn't sway. Her feet remain planted. Elias moves slowly, not stopping, not speaking. 20 meters away, he kneels. The calf's eyes are open but dull. There's a faint wound behind his jawline. Scabbed, but not healing. His breathing is shallow and wet. The earth beneath him is dry. No urine, no dung, no scent of recent health. Elias doesn't reach out. He turns his gaze upward toward the mother. Her ears twitch once. Her right leg shifts, but not in warning. If anything, it looks like she's waiting. A pause. A choice. He lowers his head again and whispers, not to her, but to the dust. This isn't normal. There are no other elephants nearby, no herd trailing, no guards flanking. She is alone, and she brought the calf here, not to forage, not to flee, but to stop. The calf lets out a soft, almost inaudible rumble. It's not a call. It's a breath struggling to stay inside the body. Elias pours a small stream of water from his pouch onto his palm and places it on the earth, letting it soak into the dust just inches from the calf's trunk. Nothing. No reach. No flick. He tries again, this time brushing his fingertips along the soil and sliding the moisture under the calf's nostrils. A flick. Then stillness again. Behind him, the mother takes 2 steps closer. Elias doesn't look back. She stops at the edge of the shade line, her tusks low, her breathing heavier than before. The wind shifts slightly. From her scent, he can tell. She's been walking far, long enough for the wound on her shoulder to crust into scar, long enough to reach here only when she had no more places to go. If she turns back now, the calf will not rise. If he is not hydrated, he will not last another hour. If she charges, there will be no time to retreat. But she does none of those. She stays. Still. Present. That, more than anything else, is the sign Elias needed. He opens the cloth wrap beside him and sets the water container down. He does not touch the calf. Not yet, but he knows what happens next will determine whether this becomes a rescue or a witness to quiet loss. The dust lifts slightly around the mother's feet, but she doesn't step away. Not yet, not this time. The wind had stilled by midday. Only the dry rattle of grass moved between the ranger line and the open scrub where the elephant stood. The calf shifted once, then twice, trying to push himself forward again, but his limbs did not respond. He toppled softly, folding into the ground just before the stretch of shade cast by a broken wooden post. His body did not bounce. It settled flat, as if dust itself had claimed him. Elias dropped to his knees. He had seen collapse before, sometimes from dehydration, sometimes from shock, but this felt different. The calf did not try again. No motion in his ears, no roll in the eyes. The breath that escaped was shallow, slow, and barely warm. Elias reached for the linen wrap and began soaking it with the last of the pouch's water, wringing it gently into the earth just beneath the calf's lips. Then came the sound, low, raw, and aching. The mother lifted her head, not high, not fast, and let out a single trumpet. Not defiant, not demanding. It was deeper, slower, a single note shaped more by breath than force, and then silence again. She did not move to help him, did not reach with her trunk or circle around to lift. She simply stood, still, unmoving. Her eyes fixed not on Elias but on the shape her calf had made in the dirt. There was no hesitation. It was surrender. A decision long made before arriving here. Elias whispered, "He's fading." His hands worked without speed, but with care. He pressed the cool cloth beneath the calf's jaw, hoping for a twitch, a flinch, anything. The calf's breathing did not change. A pulse was there, light, unsteady, but real. Behind him, another ranger, Wamai, arrived on foot, staying a safe distance. He didn't speak. Elias held up one hand briefly, then turned back to the calf. "He's still here," he said quietly, "but not for long." Wamai scanned the mother, noting her position. "She's not guarding." Elias nodded once. She brought him here, and she stopped. The meaning was clear between them. In most cases, a mother would defend, no matter the threat. She would stand over her calf, charge if approached, or call for the herd. This one had done none of those. She had brought him to the edge of human ground, and she had let him fall. The risk was no longer whether she would attack. It was whether the calf had enough hours left to accept help. Elias signaled softly for hydration support. Saline. Glucose. The pack would take 10 minutes to arrive. Every breath from the calf now felt measured. Every moment waiting meant the difference between life and final quiet. The dust beneath the calf's flank darkened faintly from the cloth moisture. A single front leg twitched, then went still. His ears lay flat. The mother did not approach, but she did not leave. Wamai whispered, "Why here?" Elias didn't answer, but the truth hung between them. She must have remembered this place, the scent of human hands, the softness of the edge beyond the fence. Not a haven, just a last chance. If they forced movement too soon, he could be arrested. If they waited too long, he could slip. They would have one shot to stabilize, one window. The mother turned her head slightly as if listening to the silence around them. Then she exhaled once through her trunk. It was not despair. It was released, a final act of trust left in the care of strangers. The cloth was nearly dry again. Elias reached for the next. The dust around them stayed quiet. But time, they both knew, was already moving. Elias moved with purpose now, but nothing about him was rushed. He had crossed fences before, tended to orphaned calves, and approached bulls in pain. But this was different. The mother hadn't left. She hadn't guarded either. She was still there, 10 paces off, watching without judgment or fear. That kind of stillness was not natural in the wild unless a choice had already been made. He passed the last timber post that marked the unofficial line between reserve patrol and untamed scrub. His boots pressed into the brittle earth. Each step is deliberate. No raised hands, no tools, just a quiet man walking toward a fallen life. The calf lay the same, flat, unmoving, except now. Faint tremors passed through his side with every strained breath. The soil beneath him was damp where Elias had knelt earlier, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The mother exhaled through her trunk. Not loud, no warning, just a release of breath. Elias turned slightly toward her but did not stop. He stepped beside the calf and knelt again, shifting his weight slowly so his movements wouldn't startle either of them. The mother took one step forward, then another, and then something Elias had never seen in 16 years of field work. She lowered her trunk, just slightly, brushing it once across the calf's back, and then pointed the tip downward toward the ground beside him. Not defensive, not territorial. An offering, a gesture. Elias froze. The message was not instinct. It was a memory. Somewhere, at some point, she had seen something like this before, not helped through dominance, not control, but still hands, slow care, and now she was letting it happen again. The calf gave a weak, gurgled exhale, his tongue slipping partially from his mouth. Elias moved his hand gently under the jawline. The pulse had changed. Faster, irregular. The wound near the throat had opened slightly, likely from rubbing during their walk. Flies hovered. Infection was spreading. There wasn't much time left to rehydrate, clean, and cool. Wamai approached from behind with the saline. Elias didn't turn. Set it down. Stay back. His voice was low, steady. No urgency in tone, only in the hands that reached forward with the IV pack. The mother watched, still unmoving. The calf's ear fluttered once as Elias cleaned a small patch behind the shoulder. The skin felt hot, almost scorched. He inserted the needle with slow precision. The vein held. The drip started. Then, as if some invisible line had been crossed, the mother backed away one full step and rested her front foot slightly sideways. Offload stance. A subtle sign. She would not interfere. She would not run. The choice was no longer hers. Elias glanced up just once. She knew where to bring him. Wamai didn't answer. No one did. There was nothing to say. The mother stood sentinel while two strangers crouched beside her child. No herd would have allowed this. No matriarch would have risked it. And yet here she was, still and waiting. The saline ran through slowly. It would take time. They would need to cool him next. The clothes were soaking again, one laid across the flank, another tucked behind the ear. Elias pressed a hand softly against the calf's ribs. "Come on, little one. Stay with us." The calf did not move, but his breathing deepened for a moment, then steadied. That was all. No rise, no cry, but not fading, not yet. The mother shifted her weight again, tusks tilting in the sun. Still no warning, still no fear. Just breathe, just trust. And Elias, kneeling in the dust, knew they had crossed a different kind of line. One that could never be drawn again. The afternoon heat pressed down heavier than usual, not from the sun alone, but from the weight of stillness that had settled over the patch of open earth where the calf lay. His skin was no longer just warm. It radiated heat. Elias pressed the back of his hand gently against the calf's flank and left it there. The pulse beneath was too fast, too shallow. The IV line continued its drip, but the calf's body fought harder with each passing hour. His breath came in short rattles now, the sound catching faintly in the throat. The linen cloth under his head was soaked and replaced twice already. Saline wasn't enough. Somewhere deeper, something else had taken hold. Elias moved to the opposite side and lifted the calf's front leg slightly, searching. Near the underside, just behind the front limb, the infection revealed itself. A wound half-healed and reopened. The edges were dark, swollen, and slick with heat. It didn't look deep, but the signs were clear. Internal spread. Sepsis likely. The wound wasn't just bleeding him. It was burning him from inside. Wamai approached slowly, a cold pack in hand, wrapped in layers of plantain leaves. Elias didn't look up. "He's fighting too many things," Elias said quietly. "Still no change." Elias shook his head. "He's holding on, but only barely." They worked in silence, wiping the calf's trunk, tucking cooling packs along the belly, slowly washing the infected wound with antiseptic. None of it was invasive. Nothing forced. Every action was measured and spaced. Anything more, and the body might simply shut down. 10 meters away, the mother hadn't moved. Her trunk rested against the soil, curled lightly inward. Her ears flared occasionally in the breeze, but her body gave no sign of fear or departure. She watched. Every motion, every cloth passed, every whispered sentence. Elias returned to the calf's side and knelt again, adjusting the saline line. The needle had slipped slightly. He steadied it with one hand and pressed his other palm flat into the dust. "He's losing time," he whispered, not to Wamai, not to the air, but to the quiet. "If we wait for a turn, he'll never see it." The fever could not be broken with fluids alone, but cooling might slow it. The wound would need dressing and regular flushes. They needed shelter, shade beyond canvas, temperature control, rest. The open field would not offer that. Wamai placed another soaked cloth behind the calf's ears and stood. "Move him." Elias looked down at the calf's legs, limp but twitching faintly. "Only if we're sure the mother will follow. If she doesn't, he might give up. And if we don't move him, he dies, here." Wamai nodded once and turned toward the field station, making the call. The calf let out a small sound then. Not a cry, not a trumpet. Just a groan, almost a hum. A noise pressed from deep within the chest as though he were straining to breathe out the heat inside him. Elias leaned in close, wiping sweat from the calf's face. The breath continued, ragged but present. The wind stirred dust across the clearing again. The mother blinked slowly and lifted her trunk a few inches, then set it down again. Nothing more. Elias watched the rise and fall of the calf's ribs and counted each motion. They were running out of chances, and the fever was not waiting. The dust had settled into the creases of the calf's skin. His breath came in slow, shallow pulls now, steadier than before, but still weak. The infection had dulled his movement, and though the cooling cloths did what they could, the fever still lingered beneath. Around him, the ground had been darkened by effort. Water, antiseptic, saline, and the silent imprint of hands that had not stopped working since morning. Elias shifted his knee and glanced toward the mother again. She was watching from just beyond the shade line, unmoving, her ears still. He had not approached her. He hadn't needed to. Every time the calf had been touched, every time a cloth had been pressed to his flank or the IV adjusted, the mother had stayed. Not withdrawn, but present. Then, without warning, she moved. Not away in fear or aggression, but in something gentler. She stepped toward them first, 2 slow paces forward. Then she circled. Once, a wide arc. Her eyes passed over Elias, then the calf, then the scrub behind. She did not trumpet. She did not pause. When the circle closed, she stopped. Then she turned, and she walked. Not fast, not stumbling. Each foot placed as though she had rehearsed it, as though she had known she would do this all along. She moved toward the open stretch beyond the field boundary, where the trees grew wider and the heat began to drop. She didn't look back. Wamai stepped beside Elias. Neither man spoke. There was no need. The mother had done what few animals ever did in the wild. She had trusted strangers with what mattered most, and now she had given them the space to act. Elias pressed his hand gently to the calf's neck. The skin was still warm, but no longer burning. The fluids had helped. The groans had stopped, but the weight of the fever still lingered. "She's not running," Wamai said quietly. "She's letting us try." Elias nodded once. "Then we don't waste it." They worked quickly, but with calm. The wrap was soaked again, cooled and folded tighter against the calf's belly. Elias checked the IV line. Steady, flowing. Then, with Wamai on one side and a third ranger now arriving on the other, they began the lift. There was no stretcher, just fabric, hands, and balance. The calf did not cry out. His legs hung limp, but his head lolled slightly toward Elias's arm. The scent of dried soil clung to his skin. Step by step, they moved him. The shelter was 20 meters away. A canvas structure erected near the ranger's shade post. just enough to block wind and harsh sun. Inside, cool clothes, a soft layer of sand, and shade that held through midday. As they walked, the calf made one small sound, a throat vibration more than a cry. It was breathtaking. Elias paused for half a second, adjusted the wrap around his ribs, and continued. Behind them, the mother stood at the edge of the grass. She had not crossed into the trees. She was close enough to see, but far enough not to stop them. Her trunk moved once, brushing the side of her leg. Then stillness again. They reached the shelter. They laid the calf down, slow, careful evenly across his side. Elias pressed his hand again to the flank. The pulse was faster now, still fragile but rising. It was a start. Outside, the light shifted. The mother did not return, but she remained visible, framed in the space between trees and fence, standing alone. She had let go, but she hadn't left. The shelter held just enough room for the calf's body and 2 crouched rangers. It was stitched together from canvas, tarp, and shade netting strung across upright poles. Inside, the air was cooler but heavy. Dust clung to the walls. A single shallow trench ran along the rear edge to catch runoff from water-soaked clothes. It wasn't a medical tent. It wasn't meant for long-term care, but for now, it was where the fight continued. The calf had not moved since they laid him down. His legs twitched once, then quieted. His eyes opened briefly, then closed again without focus. The IV continued its slow drip. His flank lifted and fell, each breath uneven but present. Elias knelt beside him, rotating damp cloths across the belly, forehead, and underarms. The fever still lingered, not as sharp, but stubborn. A second bag of glucose solution hung beside him. Wamai monitored the flow. Neither spoke much now. There was no ceremony, just care, rhythm, and the need to hold a fragile life just long enough to shift the odds. Outside, just beyond the shelter's edge, the mother remained still. She stood facing the same direction she had earlier, toward the fence line. Her body was half-shadowed, legs planted. She had not crossed the boundary again. She had not called to her calf, but she had not disappeared either. She was waiting, not out of confusion, but with a quiet decision. She had chosen not to interfere, and now she was holding that line. Elias leaned over the calf's trunk and gently wiped the sides clean with a soaked rag. The calf did not flinch. He whispered, not words, just sound. Something calm, a pattern of presence, the sound that meant, I'm here. Wamai moved quietly to prepare another cooling cloth. He dipped it in the container, folded it into a square, and pressed it to the calf's chest. Still no change, he murmured. Give it time, Elias replied. He hasn't worsened. That's all we can ask for now. The shelter rustled once with wind, snapping the canvas on the western edge. Elias checked the pulse point again, still shallow, still fast, but not gone. They adjusted the calf's position slightly, placing a folded sack beneath his shoulder to reduce pressure on the lungs. His ears fluttered twice, a sign of irritation or strength. It was hard to tell. Either one meant awareness. Elias looked toward the entrance of the shelter. The mother hadn't moved. She's not eating, Wamai said softly. No, Elias agreed. She won't, not yet. There were dry grasses within reach, small brush, a few fruiting branches, but she stood with her back to all of them, facing the fence gap, watching what was just barely out of sight. Elias returned to the calf's side and rechecked the wound beneath the belly. The swelling had slowed. No new streaks of infection up the torso. The flushing was working. He's stable, he whispered. Not healed, not out of danger, but stable. Outside, a bird called once, sharp and brief. Then silence again. The mother shifted her weight and raised her trunk. Not an alarm, just once into the air. Then she lowered it and resumed her stillness. Elias remained beside the calf, pressing a hand to his chest again. Inside the shelter, everything was measured by breath and pulse. Outside, everything was measured by patience. She had not followed them into the hut. She had not tested the gap. She did not need to. She was still holding the hardest part, waiting, with nothing but hope between them. By the third evening, the winds had cooled. The heat no longer pressed down, and a haze of thin clouds softened the edges of the horizon. Inside the shelter, the calf lay in a better rhythm. Not strong, but steadier. His breathing no longer rasped through his chest. He stirred now when touched. His trunk occasionally lifted, as if reaching in sleep. Elias sat cross-legged beside him, worn from the rhythm of long hours. He had worked in shifts: glucose, flush, hydration, silence. The wound had drained. The fever had broken late the previous night, and now the calf's skin held warmth, not fire. There were no cries, no movement strong enough to call progress. But the signs were all there. He was returning. Slowly, piece by fragile piece. The mother had not stepped inside the line since that first departure. For 3 days she had kept her post, sometimes lying down, sometimes standing. She had not moved toward the scrub or wandered. Her position never shifted far. If the calf stirred, her ears flicked. When he groaned, her trunk rose. But she had not come closer. Until now. It began with a sound. Not a trumpet, not a cry, but the soft thud of weight in dry soil. Elias looked up to see her moving. Not in haste, not in distress. Her feet placed evenly, her body relaxed. She stepped through the gap, crossing into ranger ground again without hesitation. No warning, no fear. She walked slowly past the shelter opening, just beyond the canvas flap. She did not look inside. She did not veer toward the calf. Instead, she walked to Elias. He didn't move. He simply sat, still, palms flat against the earth. She approached him and paused. Her trunk lowered, then lifted again gently. She touched his shoulder once. A soft, careful press, just enough to feel warmth through the worn fabric of his shirt. Then she withdrew. It was not a gesture of dominance or testing. It was quiet recognition, the kind that didn't need ceremony. Elias turned slightly and met her gaze. "She waited long enough," he said softly, barely above a breath. She turned then. Not away, just sideways, positioning herself where she could see both Elias and the shelter's edge. Then she stilled again. No sound. No call. She was waiting. Wamai watched from the post near the entrance, arms folded. "She didn't come for him," he said quietly. "No," Elias replied. "She came for this part." "What part is that?" "The one where she decides when it's time." The calf stirred faintly. His trunk curled against the cloth. He shifted once. A low hum escaping from his chest. Not pain, not discomfort. Just effort. The effort was good. The light dimmed further as the sun dipped. Long shadows stretched across the open space behind them. Crickets began to stir near the grass line. The mother remained where she stood, not pressing forward, not retreating, just present, again, as she had been before. But this time she had come closer. This time the touch had been hers. And now she waited. For movement, for strength, for a sign. Nothing rushed, nothing claimed. Just dusk, settling in between breath and trust. 7 days passed beneath the quiet hush of mornings and the slow arrival of shade. The shelter no longer smelled of heat or sickness, only of dust, damp cloth, and dry earth. The calf had begun to stir with more certainty. His breath no longer rasped, and the line of swelling along his flank had faded. He drank now without coaxing. His trunk moved with intent, brushing at flies, reaching toward moisture. And that morning, for the first time, he rose. It wasn't fast. His front legs locked first, trembling. Then the rear followed in a stuttered rhythm. For a moment, it looked like he might collapse again. But he didn't. He stood, wobbly, quiet, thin, but upright, and breathing through his own effort. Elias stood back, arms at his sides. Wamai stepped forward once, then paused. Neither man spoke. The calf turned his head slowly, adjusting to the weight again. Then he took one step, then two. Not far, just enough to shift from the dark patch of shade to the brighter edge of light. At the far boundary, the mother had been watching. She had not crossed the gap again after her last approach. But she had stayed, close enough to see, to wait, to trust. Now, as the calf stepped forward, she moved. There was no trumpet, no sound at all, just the creak of grass underfoot as she walked toward the shelter. Her body carried no rush, only purpose. She stopped 5 paces from the calf, head slightly lowered, trunk extended in stillness. The calf turned again, then took another step, uneven, slow. He moved toward her. No urgency, just direction. They met in the space between tarp and dust, shelter and field. The mother did not touch him at first. She stood still until he reached her side, leaned faintly and rested his weight against her leg. Then, gently, her trunk brushed his spine. Once, twice, then rested there. They stood like that for minutes. Elias stepped back without speaking. Wamai folded the last of the clothes and packed them into the crate. The IV line had already been removed. No more bandages, no more medicine. Outside, the sun hung lower. Golden light stretched across the dirt, pooling in soft shadows where grass had grown thin. The calf shifted first. A small step forward, barely a stride. The mother followed. Not behind, not beside, but with him. In step, unhurried. Together they began to walk, past the edge of the shelter, past the spot where Elias had first knelt in the dust, past the gap in the fence, now mended but left open one last time. They moved through it without pause, their shapes falling longer in the light. Elias remained still, arms crossed lightly. "They're not rushing," Wamai said beside him. "No," Elias replied. "They're just going home." In the earth near the gap, where footprints faded and met, one mark remained. A wide impression, deep and broad, shaped by age and weight, and beside it a smaller one. Unsteady but pressed close. Not perfect, but full of effort. The wind shifted. Distant dust moved in a soft hush. The mother and calf passed beyond view, disappearing into brush that turned gold beneath the light. Nothing followed, only that pair of prints, wide and small side by side, pressed into the dirt where hope had once been left behind. And now we walked forward together,